In 2011, the retirement of the Space Shuttle fleet left the United States without a domestic vehicle capable of reaching orbit. For nearly a decade, American astronauts relied entirely on the Russian Soyuz program to access the International Space Station. To restore that capability, NASA contracted commercial companies to build the next generation of spacecraft. Demo-2 was designed as the definitive final exam for SpaceX's Crew Dragon, a test flight to prove a private corporation could safely transport humans to orbit. Passing this exam required flawless execution across a gauntlet of complex milestones. The vehicle had to survive the extreme physics of launch, sustain human life in a vacuum, execute an automated docking, and withstand the punishing thermal dynamics of atmospheric re-entry. The two men selected to evaluate this system, Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley, were both veterans of the Space Shuttle program. Here, they transitioned from flying a manual heavy spaceplane to testing a highly autonomous 21st century capsule. As a dedicated test flight, Demo-2 provided the final data points needed to earn NASA's official human rating certification. SpaceX had already flown numerous uncrewed cargo Dragon missions, but carrying astronauts introduces a completely new set of engineering constraints. As this diagram shows, the capsule requires a highly complex, zero margin for error environmental control and life support system, or E-class. Working under the floorboards, this architecture constantly scrubs carbon dioxide, replenishes oxygen, and precisely regulates internal pressure to keep the crew alive. Because the environment is unforgiving, the system is built with strict fault tolerance. Life-critical sensors are triplicated throughout the cabin, ensuring that even if individual components fail, the spacecraft can sustain its occupants. The astronauts' pressure suits act as an integrated extension of this life support architecture. When seated, umbilicals physically plug the suits directly into the capsule's environmental controls, providing occupant protection and emergency pressurization. Proving that this intricate life support network could function flawlessly under the heavy vibrations of launch and the sustained weightlessness of orbit was the primary prerequisite before operational flights could begin. NASA calculated the loss of crew probability for this test flight at 1 in 276, enforcing rigid safety thresholds. This strict standard became apparent on May 27th, when the initial launch attempt was scrubbed with less than 17 minutes on the clock due to thunderstorms. If an emergency occurred, the crew relied on the Super Drago abort system. As shown on this exterior diagram, 8 engines are built directly into the capsule's pressure walls, ready to instantly blast the crew away from a failing rocket. 3 days later, on May 30th, the weather cleared. The Falcon 9 ignited and lifted off from Launch Complex 39A, officially initiating the Demo-2 flight test. 1 minute into flight, the vehicle passed through Max Q, surviving the maximum aerodynamic pressure of ascent. Shortly after, the main engines cut off, and the first and second stages smoothly separated. While the second stage continued pushing toward orbit, the first stage booster returned to Earth, executing an autonomous vertical landing on a pre-positioned drone ship in the Atlantic Ocean. 12 minutes after liftoff, the Crew Dragon separated from the second stage rocket, coasting safely into a stable low Earth orbit. By surviving the violent physics of ascent, the capsule's structural integrity and integrated abort systems were verified for human transport. Once in orbit, the capsule's nose cone swung open to expose the forward docking ring. The spacecraft then began a series of autonomous phasing burns, adjusting its trajectory to intercept the International Space Station. Inside, Hurley and Behnken monitored the approach using a modernized interface. Moving away from the thousands of mechanical switches found in the Space Shuttle, Crew Dragon relies on sleek, suspended touchscreens to track the automated flight. At 220 meters, the crew paused the autonomous sequence for a manual test. They controlled roll, pitch, and yaw to align with the station's axes. To execute this, LiDAR sensors bounce lasers off station reflectors, feeding accurate range data back to the visual displays. With the manual override proton, the vehicle resumed its automated approach, executing a soft capture, followed by a hard docking mechanism lock. The entire sequence was closely monitored from inside the station by NASA astronaut Chris Cassidy, ready to issue a retreat command if parameters drifted. Testing that manual override confirmed the human-in-the-loop failsafes. Demonstrating that astronauts could take control of the sophisticated software was a strict requirement before trusting a fully autonomous vehicle with human lives. After a 62-day stay conducting science and maintenance on the station, Hurley and Behnken undocked. The spacecraft separated from its unpressurized trunk and executed a critical deorbit burn, committing the crew to their return to Earth. Traveling at orbital velocities, the capsule hit the upper atmosphere, generating extreme friction. The ablative Pika-X heat shield had to deflect and absorb superheated plasma reaching 3,500 degrees Fahrenheit to protect the crew inside. Once through the worst of the heat, the capsule initiated a multi-stage parachute deployment, firing drogue chutes followed by 4 massive main canopies. The descent ended with a splashdown in the Gulf of Mexico, the first water landing for astronauts since 1975. Recovery teams immediately secured the area, establishing a strict 10-mile no-boat perimeter to protect civilians from low levels of toxic gases venting from the re-entry thrusters. The scorched capsule was then lifted aboard the recovery vessel. Engineers conducted a meticulous post-flight inspection of the hardware. They identified slightly more erosion on specific heat shield tiles than expected, alongside minor variations in parachute deployment timing, data that allowed them to reinforce the design for future flights. By completing this exhaustive end-to-end flight test and providing the data necessary to resolve those minor anomalies, Demo-2 officially secured NASA's human rating certification for the Crew Dragon system. This engineering validation cleared the path for the Crew 1 mission, replacing a 9-year reliance on foreign vehicles with a schedule of routine, operational commercial flights to the International Space Station. With the system verified, the U.S. successfully resumed its own transport operations.